Okay. Hello to YouTube. If you're coming here, you're probably coming here from my Twitter, where I tend to troll, talk about the Blackhawks. Sometimes in non-trolling fashions about the Blackhawks specifically. But anywho, wanted to do a little bit of a YouTube video here to kind of react to uh, Kyle Davidson's breakdown of the first round of the draft on Friday night. I think I'm not alone in feeling some mixed emotions after the first night of the draft. Um, Definitely a stark change, I would say, in the draft strategy that the Blackhawks have kind of exhibited over the last few years. And yeah, just wanted to kind of share some observations that I made with the press conference that Kyle had, where he kind of let us into the thoughts that the team, or the organization, I should say, has, and kind of, more or less what their thought process was as they picked these players. So, with that said, I will go ahead and I'll pull up the video here. I will be pausing intermittently to kind of share my thoughts, but that said, I'll start off with just kind of hearing Kyle's introductory statements here.
I guess I'll start first. I'll open up by just congratulating Duncan Keith on getting inducted into the Hall of Fame, or getting named that he will be inducted into the Hall of Fame. He's one of the best players of his generation, and a Blackhawks legend, and we're extremely happy and excited for him that he received that honor. And so congrats to him, and really excited for him and his family on receiving that that induction. So, but I think tonight we were really happy with how it went. We were, three was we had a bunch of different. There's only so much that could happen at that stage, but we were ready for anything, and sort of what we thought was the most logical progression occurred, and so we were ecstatic with to get Anton. He's a power forward that can play down the middle or on the wing. I think he's a great complement to our group that we have now. I think he's got the chance to be a really exciting goal scorer in this league, and just couldn't be more thrilled with adding him to the organization. And then with Nestorsil and Mason West, just two super high upside players that we do think have high end potential. That they can both move really well. They've got some really good talent, hockey sense. I think they're both raw. Got a longer runway to go, but really excited about what they can be and what we were able to add to the organization today.
Was there something about Mason has quite the interesting story
Yeah.
in playing? So was there something that you saw in him that you said, okay, let's talk with Carolina because you definitely wanted to try and get him before the first round?
I think it's just the tools, like the raw tools are just something you don't see that often, and he's probably available at that point because he's behind the curve. He's not quite dedicated himself 100% to hockey, but at that size, that athleticism, that skating ability, that talent, it's the sky's the limit, and we just felt it was, I just really wanted to get back into the first round to take, what I thought was a grand slam hack. I'm swinging for the fences, and figured why not? Let's go for a big one here, and so that's kind of what I did.
Is that similar to the mentality that you had when you drafted Sam Lindsell in 2022, where the tools were there, but it might be longer for him to actually get to the NHL?
Yeah, like the two sport thing is very different. Sam was, he was a hockey player, and Mason is a hockey player, but he also plays football, and so, I think that speaks to he's very behind the curve. There's a lot of runway, but I think we've got a top-notch development staff that can really, get in there and make him the best hockey player he can be. And I think there's tons of upside. He's planning on, he's committed to Michigan State, which is, we've got a lot of faith in that program. Adam Nightingale runs a hell of a hockey program there. And so, you know, we've had Artie come out of Michigan State, and so we're very familiar with them and what they do, and have all the faith in the world that he's going to end up at a really quality development situation.
Frondell, like any.
Okay, so this is the first point that I want to just kind of stop and, like I said before, just kind of share my own thoughts or observations, what have you, what I'm hearing Kyle talking about here. And obviously he talks a little bit about Frondell there. There's not too much to be said about Frondell in my opinion. Others would disagree, I know, but we knew the pick was going to be Frondell. But anyway, I want to take a second and just kind of, I guess, unpack for me what Kyle Davidson's saying here as he talks more about Nestrasil and West as the latter two picks in the first round. And obviously he leans a little bit more into talking about Mason West as he continues to talk. And, frankly, West is arguably the most interesting prospect in the draft, and most certainly in the first round, right? But anywho, he's talking about how these two guys have raw tools, and saying that you don't see tools like this come around very often, especially in the case of Mason West, as he points out. But he calls them out both as moving well, having high talent, high hockey sense, again, raw, having a lot of runway, and most interestingly, in my opinion, he says this directly about Mason West, but I do think it applies to Nestrasil and West, but he calls them out as being behind the curve. The reason that stands out to me, the reason that I want to make note of it, is that it reminds me of the rationale that was explained behind picking Levshinov last year. Scouting and drafting, generally speaking, are kind of a balancing act between measuring the player for who they are currently at the time of making the pick, and projecting out who you can see them to be in 10 years, right? So personally, I find it interesting that the Blackhawks seem to have significantly leaned into projections of players over the past couple of years at least. But anyway, they're leaning into these projections of players who, as we've heard here and in years past now with Kyle, these players who have a lot of runway. I think the takeaway from this observation for me is that it maybe gives us a window into the Hawks' confidence in their ability to develop prospects. And I know that's not necessarily groundbreaking, of an observation, but even still, I think that it's interesting that you see some other teams. Honestly, I'll call out the New York Islanders here for drafting players for more who they are right now. And again, clearly the Blackhawks have a bit of a different approach here, but anyway, again, I just think that it's interesting, that window into the confidence that they have. And honestly, I want to kind of pose the question of if it's warranted. But anyway, if they feel so comfortable to draft based on projection, they're showing us that they must, that they can pretty confidently help to bring it all together with these players who are raw, who have this long runway. And that they're confident in their ability to elevate these players to hit or even exceed their ceiling, which I'll come back to in a bit. But if you're not confident in that development, then you're not going to lean into projection, right? Like they're showing their hand to some degree here. Not that it's a bad thing to show their hand in this regard, but they're showing us their intentions, right? I can't lie. Like I said, personally, I'm not necessarily sold on the Blackhawks' ability to develop prospects. And for anyone who doesn't know me, doesn't know how long I've been a fan of the Blackhawks, I'm not one of these old heads. I can't lie. I started watching hockey in 2013. It was the first full season I watched, I should say. So obviously that was the lockout shortened season in which the Blackhawks absolutely destroyed, won the Stanley Cup and the President's Trophy in the same season. But that's where my fandom started here. And for anyone else who is in that fandom of the Blackhawks, you will remember terrible stories of players not hitting their potential through the Blackhawks development system. So I call this out just to say maybe there's some bias on my front there. Maybe I'm a little bit too hung up on poor cases of development in the past, but I want to kind of explain a little bit of why that still sits with me. But anyway, to get back on topic here, like I said, I'm not totally sold, and I don't think I'm alone in that, whether that is for people who have been around and seen some of those pardon the phrasing, but some failures along the way, or whether that's people who maybe have just gotten into the Blackhawks, right? I know you draft Connor Bedard, you inject a whole bunch of new fandom into the organization there. So I'm sure that there are players, or pardon me, individuals following this team who didn't see the the Dylan McElraths of the world and the Philip Deneaus who looks terrible, goes to another organization, and now he's you know a Selke candidate, right? So anyway, I digress, but we have seen a lot of success among Hawks prospects lately, right? We've got Sasha Boisvert, Sam Rinzel, and Frank Nazar as guys who come to mind, whose early returns seem to have exceeded expectations, significantly so in some cases. But conversely, we could take a look at Korchinski, we could take a look at Lucas Reichel, excuse me, and honestly, to be frank, you could point to Connor Bedard as examples that haven't exactly been what we expected them to be. Excuse me again. And before I get too far ahead of myself, I want to be very clear. I do not mean this as an indictment on Bedard or Korchinski or honestly even Reichel. All these guys are so young. I think that they all still have a lot of, pardon the phrase, but runway ahead of them. And, I don't want to come across as like, again, making an indictment on any of these players. I think Connor Bedard's an exceptional player, truly, but I digress. So we have some examples that you could look at and just kind of see that maybe that's just not quite what you expected Connor Bedard to be. Whether or not our expectations of Bedard was warranted, I think all of us kind of thought that for some reason, unfair, right? But we thought he was probably going to be hitting like a point per game pace, even in his rookie season, some people said, right? So again, I don't think that's fair. I don't think that was a warranted expectation. But again, my point here is just to illustrate we have some guys that we could point to as like, well, it raises the question that I'm making, right? How good can the Blackhawks really develop their own prospects here? We've got a couple examples that might, leave something to be desired. But regardless, we have these guys who I pointed to initially, your Boisverts, Rinzel, Nazars, who went to the NCAA and have, again, so far surpassed the expectations that we thought, or of who we thought they were going to be, I should say. And we have some guys who came right into the organization and aren't quite what we thought, right? So a little bit of a mixed bag, but honestly, beating around the bush a little bit to say, and what I'm getting at is like, it looks like the Blackhawks, their organizational development system might not be doing as well as these NCAA teams, right? So we can trust the Blackhawks. So can we trust the Blackhawks to develop their players? Can we trust that the picks they're making based on projections are wise to be making? And don't get ahead of me. I'm still at a maybe when I pose this question. I'm not making an assertion one way or the other at this point. And there's still a lot of Hawks prospects who at this point I would label as total question marks, right? Lardis, Oliver Moore, and Levshinov honestly stand out for me here as question marks in the system still. I don't think that we have a really great idea of where any of those guys are going to land ultimately. But I'll call out, obviously, early returns on Lardis look incredible. But in all honesty, until he translates that to a pro level, the question remains, right? So anyway, these three players' development paths are all extremely different. But Levshinov is the one that these question marks will be a perfect case study for, in my opinion, as far as like getting a look at how confident we can be in the Blackhawks' ability to develop a prospect. Obviously, they took a very non-traditional route with Levshinov as a 19-year-old, having the ability to sign him, put him into the NHL, as opposed to him, a CHL prospect would have had no choice to go to the AHL, right? Moreover, Levshinov had the ability to go back to the NCAA, but the Blackhawks decided, no, we're going to take full control of this prospect, right? We're going to put him in the NHL. The AHL. We're going to really, have our fingerprints all over his development. So just a point that I want to point out there. Like I said, I think Levshinov's a very interesting case study as specifically how the Blackhawks can develop a prospect. But to go back to the initial point that I was making, you know, they're they're just not totally clear here, and we're kind of all over the map as to like where do we stand? Where do the Blackhawks stand in their development process, right? Um, or their system, I should say. How well are the Blackhawks actually developing prospects? It's hard to say. So, um, nonetheless, I would say with all of these prospects, all of their prospects, you deal the hand that you've been dealt, and you know, in all fairness, Bedard, Korchinski, those guys, they don't have that ability to go to the AHL, like I had said. Um, and I just think that it's just interesting. It's not we don't have a clear understanding of like where these guys are. But anywho, so to highlight Levshinov again as someone who I think the Blackhawks their DNA is all over his development at this point. And you take a look at the start of his season. Again, the Blackhawks make the decision to put him in the AHL. Frankly, doesn't look great in the NHL or in the AHL this past season. He certainly wasn't terrible, and moreover, looked mostly competent in the NHL. I think a lot of people share that opinion. I know that there are others who disagree. Shout out Soft Serve Scouting. But there's for the most part a bit of a consensus that Levshinov looked better in the NHL than what you would have thought he would have looked like based on his AHL time, right? But again, all that to say, overall, Artem Levshinov's first pro season, underwhelming, I think. I think there's a consensus that it was kind of underwhelming, even though he did look really good in the NHL. And certainly it's exciting to think of what is to come as Levshinov transfers into his second pro season. And moreover, he's got a lot of time ahead of him to work in the gym and on the ice. He certainly still has a lot of the runway that the Blackhawks drafted him for in the first place. And moreover, these big runway swings Kyle took in the first round, they're both going to the NCAA. We know this, right? Like they've both committed, assuming Mason West doesn't bail on hockey entirely, they've both committed to going to the NCAA following USHL playing time. So, all of what I'm saying here, and Kyle is saying that he has confidence in the Blackhawks system to develop prospects. I think maybe I'm arguing a little bit that there's some more faith being placed in the NCAA's ability to develop prospects. And, based on what we've seen from the Blackhawks, we should logically, I think it's fair to expect these swings to kind of at least not disappoint, right? The Blackhawks system is chock full of NCAA products who are surpassing expectations. And even if their ceiling isn't elite, like a Frank Nazar and Sam Rinzel from the looks of it at this point, they're surpassing the expectations that we would have had when they were drafted, right? Guys like Slaggert, Green, Thompson, Vlasic all come to mind as people who, when they were drafted, with the exception of Vlasic, I don't think that there was certainty that they were even going to be NHL talents. You know what I mean? And I guess there's never certainty in the draft, in all fairness, right? Everything has to be taken with a grain of salt. But, all these guys, again, maybe not elite. I know you could make the argument for Vlasic, again, that he is an elite defensive talent. But nonetheless, all have certainly surpassed the expectations that once were placed upon them. Full stop. So, again, these guys are exceeding expectations after going the NCAA route. And again, logically, I think it's fair to be optimistic about Nestrasil and West, knowing that they're taking a similar path, right? So not only are they heading down the path the Blackhawks have found success with, but they are massive. They're fast and skilled guys. And, I just think that it's, again, interesting to kind of hear Kyle say, although he's not quite saying it, that the Blackhawks have found something that works with the NCAA system, and the confidence that they have in development, I find fascinating. And, personally, like I had said, right, while I might sit back listening to Kyle and say, well, I don't know, I don't really know how well you guys can develop talent. Yeah, again, I take a step back and I say, well, maybe this path actually is a good thing to do, and moreover a good thing to lean into, right? And maybe Kyle's not outright admitting that the NCAA route is the best path for their prospects, um, but it's less a statement, I guess, of how well they, as the Blackhawks, that being that they, how well they can develop their prospects, and maybe more a statement of how well they trust the NCAA to develop their prospects. So yeah, just my kind of initial thoughts here as Kyle starts the press conference. But that said, I'll let him get back into it here.
High-end pick wants to be in the NHL next year. Is that feasible, or is he? I mean, will he even be able to come to training camp if he's got to get to the Swedish Pro League?
I believe he'll be able to come to training camp. Yeah. It's probably contract situations and all that stuff that has to be figured out before that. But we'll see. I don't think we have any expectation one way or another. Right now, the plan as we stand here today is that he's playing in Diergarten in the SHL next year. But we've got a lot of time to figure out if that's the best path. I think it's a great path if that's the one that occurs. So we'll just kind of figure that out moving forward.
Was there a point where you were convinced that he was the guy that?
Like just for us,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
or that we were going to get him, because that was when they picked Misa.
But no, I guess during the season when you thought zeroing in.
Yeah, like he was just always in that conversation, like right at the top there. And then after the lottery, when we figured out where we were and what the situation was, I think it's a process, and we really went through it. But he was always a guy that was right at the top of our list for much of the year. He's in that that elite group right at the top of our draft board that you kind of debate all year long, and then in the end came out in his favor.
When do you like some?
So I'm gonna let Kyle more or less keep going, but just a quick comment that I had here, a quick observation when I first watched this, which for what it's worth was Saturday night, or Friday night, I should say. So outdated, old take, but whatever. I just wanted to call out here that I think that this is the first time, or maybe not the first time, pardon me, but I think this is the most transparent that at least I've witnessed Kyle be about these war room conversations in the last 3 years, at least. And I might be off base in what I'm hearing from Kyle here, but to me, this sounds like he's low key admitting that the Blackhawks had Misa ahead of Frontel, or Frondell, pardon me. You hear him kind of chuckle at the, well, we knew we were getting Frondell when the Sharks took Misa. And, just to call myself out here, maybe he's saying more so that he was still worried that the Sharks were going to take Anton Frondell. I don't know if I believe that personally, but nonetheless, the interesting part is him referring to Frondell as being in that conversation in a group of elite players. And again, to me, that just seems like, again, more transparency than we're used to seeing from Kyle in these, again, allusions to their war room conversations. But yeah, just interesting. But I'll let him keep going from here.
I just think he's a really smart hockey player. I think he uses his body very effectively, especially in battles along the wall. He just has a really projectable game to the NHL, and I think he plays the game the way that it's played, not only in North America on the small rink, but also in May and June. I think he plays very, heavy, hard, almost quote unquote playoff hockey. And so I think that's something that we were really excited to add. He can play a skill game, he can play a heavy game, he can play it any way you want. And so we're really excited about that.
You've made 11 first.
All right, so I'm going to stop Kyle there again to just share some of my observations. And funny enough, as I record this, it's June 30th, so it's the Monday following the draft. And just today on Twitter, I was talking with a few people. I retweeted Tony Granato talking about how he sees Anton Frondell as a mix, a combination of Alex Barkov and Sam Bennett, right? And I was expressing some frustration there. I don't think that that's a very fair expectation to to place upon Anton Frondel as a guy who, I mean, frankly, doesn't play the same game as either of those players. He doesn't play Sam Bennett's game. He doesn't play Sasha Barkov's game. He wants to play Sasha Barkov's game. He's said that himself, and that's great. And if he gets there, that's even better, right? But I digress. I think that it's interesting the way Kyle has framed this, because I think that's a lot more fair than, and nothing against Tony Granato by any means, because he's far from the only person to have said something to this effect, but I think this is a much more fair assessment of Anton Frondel's game than likening him to, well, frankly, likening him to any other player, right? Comps are inherently flawed, but I digress. My observations here, we're hearing Kyle talk about Anton Frondel, and I love that he had called out before that he was in that higher caliber all season long, because I think that we've stopped talking about this part of Frondel's story for a little bit here. You go back to 2024, and there was a legitimate chance at the time that Frondel would come out of this past season as the number one prospect. And we've heard that dialogue a lot about James Hagens, and rightfully so. I mean, he was the consensus number one pick going into this past season. And we've kind of heard a little bit of this conversation, a little bit of this dialogue, I should say, around Ivan Ryabkin, although this season went much worse for Ivan Ryabkin. But we seem to kind of forget or lose sight, or at least not talk about how Anton Frondel entered this season with that same sort of pedigree. Now, I'm not, I'm not the one to point out pedigree as like a reason to believe in someone, or a reason to draft someone especially. But at the same time, that I do place some value in there. There's something to be said about players having sustained high production. So anyway, but again, so pedigree's not nothing in my opinion. Again, Frondel was a top 3 prospect at the end of the 24-25 season. Started this past season injured, or pardon me, I misspoke there. 23-24 season, he was a top 3 prospect. Started this past season, the 24-25 season, injured. Didn't play exceptionally by any means at the start of the season. Finished the second half of the season kind of on fire, and I know there's an argument to be made about puck luck contributing to his production towards the end of the season, but frankly, that's not here what I'm talking to talk about today. So anyway, all that to say, we go from top 3 pick, projection dips while he's injured, comes back up to a top 3 pick at the end of the season once he's healthy. And I know that's a gross oversimplification of the player, but you can see on the surface why it would be easy to believe in the player, right? Like, you have this track record that you can put some stock into. It's not everything, but again, it's not nothing. So all that said, Kyle goes on to talk a little bit more about specifically what he likes in Frondel's game, calling out how he plays a game you want to play in May and June. The thing that we knew, every team, I think all of us saw that this draft was going to be a swing of the pendulum for every team, not just the Blackhawks here. Every team wanted to play more like the Panthers. Everyone wanted to Sam Bennett. Everyone wanted to, get bigger, all these things, right? But so yeah, I think it's interesting to hear him call out that that's something that stands out for Anton Frondel's game. And specifically calling out that he uses his body effectively, plays a really projectable game, heavy, hard playoff hockey. I really like this insight from Kyle, because this is the good that I see in Anton Frondel's game personally. And I don't get the chance to watch, the most tape by any means, but clips of Anton Frondel that stick out to me, the things that I like kind of use to cope, if you will, are seeing him protect the pucks, seeing him use his body to, again, protect the puck, or like win battles sometimes, play against the boards decently well, very well, considering that he plays against men, in my opinion. But and get to open ice. He uses his frame, he uses his raw abilities to find soft ice. And, those are things that I personally see translating into the playoffs really well. You want a guy who's going to be able to just like be strong, find places that he needs to be to finish, and be able to stay there, right? Like, love Connor Bedard, love him more than any player that's come through any draft in a long time. That's his number 16 up here, Team Canada jersey. Anyway, but Connor's not the strongest guy on the ice, and you can't necessarily inherently place the same kind of just faith, I guess, that he'll be able to find open ice and stick in it. You know what I mean? So anyway, I just see that as a benefit of Anton Frondel's game, something that he has that other players don't always. But I don't love how Kyle kind of finishes this comment. He finishes by saying that Frondel can play a skill game, can play a hard game, he'll do it all. And I just don't love that, because I think pretty much anybody you talk to, and obviously across the board, scouting outlets, EP, Dauber, public scouting in general, it's a mixed bag when you're talking about Frondel. Some being as low as like a mid-first rounder, which I think is wrong, but that's not the point of this video. But they're all over the board. But everything, or pardon me, all of these people seem to kind of agree, and I would agree, that Frondel clearly lacks creativity and dynamism, if you will. And when we talk about a skill game, there's a certain level of dynamism that comes to mind. It's really, frankly, not clear whether Frondel has that level of dynamism that you're looking for in a skill game. Again, that doesn't mean that he won't be a good player, to be totally clear. But I just don't love that this might be kind of a lack of awareness on display from the Hawks in who they just drafted. And I'm just a guy, literally just a guy on the internet here. And there's a room full of professionals taking a look at these guys. So totally possible, frankly, likely for that matter, that they see something that I don't. And I will call out, I am personally a believer that Frondel's playing the way that he's coached to play. I think that he's a very coachable player. I think that he does what he's told, and those are great things. Definitely great things in the playoffs, for that matter. And it's totally possible that he has a level of dynamism that he's not putting on display because he's, doing what he's told to do, going out there and playing the game that he's told to do or to play in order to win. So yeah, just genuine in that. I think, might be some display of a lack of awareness. Might not be. Might be a window into, what they know and I don't. So again, I'll let Kyle get back into it.
Round picks in the last 4 drafts.
Mhm.
Is it just a numbers game, knowing that not everybody's going to hit, and you just take as many lottery tickets as you can, or do you look at them as assets that can be moved down the road? How do you look at that kind of?
I think you're, again, it's funny, like the draft in every way is a game of chance and a game of odds. I think there's some logic in that, and where we've picked a lot and we've gone volume, but also some of my things like, today, if you're playing the odds and playing, I don't know what you call it, the stats or the analytics of it, like the trade we made to get back in the first round was not that. That was, we got back in, but it's probably not I gave up probably a lot more to get back in to take Mason than, the charts would suggest. And that's okay. Sometimes we're willing to do that, and I'm willing to stick my neck out and really jump at a guy. But your observation about us making all those picks early it's kind of been part of the strategy, is that we want to hit it with volume and, believe that will prevail in bringing us the most number of players. And, I think the more you pick early in the NFL or any draft, NFL, NHL, it's late. Then it's you're more likely to succeed. And so we've taken that philosophy and tried to hit it with volume. But I also believe that, again, some of these players are getting to the NHL. Some of them are on their path. But I do believe, from our assessment, an objective assessment, we feel their development so far, we are ahead of the odds in some way. I think we are, beating the odds and getting a few more players out of drafts than, the odds may dictate. And so hopefully that continues. Hopefully the upward trajectory, bears that out and it continues. But we're really happy with how it's gone the last little while, and added 3 more players that we're really excited about today.
All right. So again, just gonna kind of jump in and I mean, a couple things. One, the NFL slip of the tongue. So relatable. Honestly, this draft was an absolute slog to get through. I imagine that it was just as much of a slog for these guys, but anywho, not the point of what he's saying at all. So the meat of what Kyle's saying here, I don't love it. And like I said, I kind of first watched this video, first made my observations on Friday night immediately after the draft. I think it was Friday. It might have been Saturday. It doesn't really matter, I guess. But the night the video was released, I watched it, and I've talked a little bit about this, about Mason West in particular, on Twitter quite a bit. But yeah, I don't love Kyle openly admitting that he overpaid to get back in the first round and draft Mason West. That's alarming. If we're being honest, that's alarming to hear your GM ever say that they overpaid, especially when they're dealing with Eric Tulsky, to be honest. But that's a different conversation. But yeah, you don't ever want to hear your GM say that they overpaid. But I do want to highlight kind of the subtext, if you will, of what Kyle's saying, for the reason that while I don't love it, and I don't know that I even love the Mason West pick, although I do love the player, which is a weird thing to say, but whatever. And actually, this is aged pretty well, Kyle's pick, but I'll come back to that in a second anyway. Again, I don't hate Kyle Davidson admitting that he overpaid here, while I don't love it. So, Kyle's been saying that he wants to be aggressive, right? Whether it's at the draft or improving the team in general. He said it multiple times. If you keep up with the team, if you keep up with his press conferences, pardon me, you've heard him say this kind of a lot at this point. So yeah, again, I think that we've heard numerous reports that point that aggressive unrestricted free agency pursuits this year probably aren't going to go the Hawks' way. You think of Marner, you think of Ehlers, you think of these guys who I think a lot of us entering this offseason in the Blackhawks fan base were extremely optimistic about. It's not going to happen. Kyle has all but admitted it at times. Scott Powers has been very vocal to say, like, temper your expectations, temper them, I guess I should say. But anyway, don't expect to land one of these big fish. It's not gonna happen, right? We've heard it plain and simple. Guys don't want to play for a loser, and nobody around the league has a reason to believe that the Hawks are anything but a loser yet. So if aggressive pursuits of UFAs are off the table, how else do you get aggressive and use what you have to get better? Swing for grand slams, as it were, right? And that kind of makes sense to me. That kind of, again, that's what helps me land on I don't hate Kyle Davidson openly admitting that he overpaid to get back in the first round here. Analytically, you can break down the value of picks and their success rate, potential percentages, and all that. But at the end of the day, you got to be kind of realistic when you're in the draft. And if you see a guy like Mason West, who, again, as I alluded to, we've heard since this video came out, I should say, we've heard the reports that the Kings wanted to take Mason West with their late first round pick. I think it was 31. So again, Kyle takes a big swing, just as he said, on a guy who has a lot of upside. And yeah, maybe you get rid of these second round picks who, again, realistically, chances are won't be NHL players. Moreover, and really to Kyle's point, picks that we know aren't going to be Mason West at this point, right? Like, players we know won't have the same upside as you know, the 6'6" freak athlete available at the end of the first round here. So anyway, I'm rambling, but again, don't love this. Could see how this turned a lot of Blackhawks fans off. Frankly, kind of a big fucking yikes hearing your GM say something like this. But again, for me personally, the more I kind of resonate, or the more I marinate with this, and the more it kind of sets in for me, the more I like it. And again, since this video came out, I've been open on Twitter that I share the hunch, as Kyle later put it, that Mason West is going to be a star. I just personally, that's how I feel, and I guess we'll see. We'll see what happens. So anyway, I'll let Kyle keep going for I think a couple more questions here.
Did you give any thought to the size of these forwards?
It just kind of worked out that way, actually. It wasn't something that we were directly targeting. It wasn't, you know, we got to get all big forwards or anything like that. Just worked out that way. And yeah, I think it's a neat element that we've added in the size. But it wasn't something where, you know, we cut smaller forwards or anything like that off the board. They just kind of, that's the way it fell.
Did you entertain any trade, I guess, offers for that third pick?
No. People, you know, it was asked along the way, but nothing that I would have even considered.
What about Nestor Sill? What did you like about him?
Oh yeah, just again, you know, you like the physical attributes where big athletic guy that can really move. Think he's got some talent, some really good hockey sense, and again, a raw package that he's going to go to college. So you know, he's going to be in a situation where he's going to play against some older players and challenge himself, and a good development situation there. And so, you know, I think there's a lot of the similar things we liked with Mason, or why we really like Václav. And so, yeah, again, just think there's a really high upside to his tools.
Was there anything that you learned from the last year with AJ Spelzy from the football hockey dynamic that maybe made you more comfortable with Mason West doing?
I don't think there's anything we learned. It's just, I think they're both very, very athletic, and very athletic at an above average size, which is unique. When you can move that well at that size, that is a weapon. That is an asset that you possess. Now you have to be able to play and figure out what's going on the ice, but you know, it's something that we've seen in AJ that Mason does very well too. And so it's that athleticism and that ability to you know, play two sports and do very well in both is, I think it just speaks to their you know, that athletic facility that they have to continue to rise and continue to do things that you want them to do, and you want their bodies to, you know, grow into as well. And so it's, I think they're just exciting prospects and exciting packages.
Okay, stopping very quickly just to say, I mean, it was a little bit ago, towards the beginning of when I pressed play here, but Kyle's saying that they didn't target size in this draft. And I know, obviously, this organization historically has not prioritized size, even, you know, to a mimetic degree at times, you know, really leaning into smaller players with high compete. But this is BS to me. Maybe it wasn't consciously, you know, could have been subconscious that they did this, but I mean, you know, you'd take Nestor Sill and Mason West at the end of the first round. I mean, these guys are giants, and I'm not mad at it. I'm excited for these players. Especially for Nestor Sill. I really wanted Nestor Sill as a Blackhawk, and moreover, like I was just saying, I think Mason West's gut feeling is that he's gonna just be exceptional at the NHL level someday. So again, I'm not mad at it. I don't quite understand how, you know, you could say that size wasn't part of the thought process here. And moreover, he kind of almost admits that it was as he continues to talk. You know, he emphasizes size as an attribute a lot, and I know size is an attribute inherently, but yeah, I don't know. It's okay to just say that size was a target this year, I think, you know, and I feel like it was. It seems like it was. the evidence points to it being a priority. But anyway, other than that, love that we get a little bit of insight about AJ Spellacy. I think Kyle has a little bit of a smirk on his face here, saying that they didn't necessarily learn anything from AJ Spellacy. I think that might not be entirely true either. I think, AJ Spellacy, another, extremely athletic kid, almost makes the Blackhawks out of camp in his draft plus one season, it would have been. Again, that doesn't mean that you're going to learn that freak athletes have some higher ability to compete or just to be an athlete, pardon the phrasing there, but and that doesn't mean that that's going to make you make a pick. But I do think that there's something there. I think that there's, I think you look at AJ Spellacy, then you look at Mason West this year, and you say, things already look really good for AJ Spellacy. He's shown us a lot of reason to believe in him. Maybe that gives me a little bit more confidence with Mason West, right? So I don't mean to call Kyle a liar by any means, but I think maybe there's something that was learned.
I don't think you're talking from a while from now, but between now and the free agency, anything you're looking to achieve next week or anything?
Not, I think we're going to listen and see what comes our way. Feels like it's been pretty well documented with other GMs that have talked around the league. It's, it feels pretty stagnant. I think the rising cap has made a lot of teams quite comfortable in just trying to add or stick with their current squads. And so I just feel like that's held back player movement a little bit this year. It could be a one-year anomaly, but that's just the way it is right now. And so we'll see if anything comes available that's advantageous for us to jump on. But outside of Andre, we haven't really had that arise on our end. So keep making calls and checking in and seeing what's available to us in the market.
Before you got that third pick, did you try to make a move to get higher up in the round?
No, we did not. I think it was pretty obvious that everything was set. Everything was locked in. And so I can't remember what the first pick that did move was. Maybe it was 12? Was it 12, Pittsburgh?
Yeah.
12? Yeah, so, it seemed pretty locked in there. And so nothing really seemed available. So.
All right, gonna pause Kyle again here just to highlight what he's saying, I guess. First thing that we heard him say there, it sounds like he's actually responding to Scott Wheeler, Scott Powers. I'm not keeping my Scott straight. He's responding to Scott. Anyway, but Scott has maintained Powers for the Reds. He's responding to Scott Powers, who has been kind of banging the drum of, again, like I was saying earlier, kind of temper your expectations of the Blackhawks off season here. Kyle is implying that it doesn't really sound like crazy trades are coming, at least. Market's not in an ideal spot for the Hawks. So yeah, just want to kind of highlight that again. I think Blackhawks fans, we had these lofty expectations of this offseason, and I just don't think that's where we're heading at this point. So might as well highlight it. And I will say here, I have actually a few kind of lengthy notes about Kyle's response when asked about trading picks. Initially, when I watched this video, I thought that the question being posed to Kyle was, did you try to move back, or did you try to move up into the first round higher than you were? Somewhere around that 12 range is what I thought was being asked. As I listened to it back, that's not the question. The question being asked is if there was ever really any intention about leveraging the third overall pick to move in the draft. And in all honesty, I'm glad that Kyle didn't trade the third pick to move lower in the draft unless the return was crazy. And honestly, I know we heard reports that the pick had been thrown out there as a potential JJ Peterka package. Don't know what to believe on that front now. In all honesty, though, unless you're getting that 9th overall pick and, somehow getting a way to get maybe another couple picks towards the middle of the round there, probably wise to keep that third pick. Honestly, I do think. I think most people probably think that Anton Frondel ultimately will end up a better player than JJ Peterka. Still would have loved to have JJ Peterka on the Blackhawks, but that's a whole nother conversation for another time, I suppose. But anyway, gonna let Kyle kind of wrap this up, and I'll share my final sort of thoughts after he is concluded.
Burakovsky trade, what was the process behind that?
Yeah, I think we felt that Andre brought a little bit of extra speed and extra talent and upside to our roster. I think he had a little injury situation 2 years ago, and then hasn't really found that form again. But I think we've got a great opportunity for him. You can look back and see when he's played over a certain number of minutes, he has really produced. And I think in our setup, we should have some opportunity for him to get those minutes and get those opportunities. And he's a talented player that can play with good players. And so, where he plays is up to Blash, and let him figure that out. But figured it was a nice addition to our top nine to provide another little bit of offensive talent to the group.
How is your experience different with the decentralized draft this year versus?
Yeah. I was saying, the lead up, I'm kind of bounced back and forth where there's some things that are nice, some things that, are kind of unique and you like about going to a town. The nice things were you have these really long days at this time of year, and you're on the phone all day and you're exhausted. And it was nice to go home and see my daughters rather than go and sit in a hotel room by yourself. That was really nice. I could go see my girls, sit on the couch, you can really relax versus, last year in Vegas, you're walking around and there's, slot machines going off and you're going to your hotel room and the walls are kind of crawling on you. But, I think, but then today, it's nice to be in your setup and in your room and familiar quarters, but it's also pretty cool to walk out onto an arena floor and a full arena. And so, there's different things about it. There's pros and cons, but, see what the NHL decides next year.
No street interviews today?
I never got out onto the street. I never got out there. The guys that were playing men's league noticed me and gave me a wave, but they knew who I was. So, yeah.
Do you find, maybe you're building a reputation for trades among other GMs and is making them more receptive to you being able to do that?
Well, certainly Eric Tulsky and I think I traded back into the first with him last year for Merrick Van Acker. So, I don't know. Yeah, maybe. Again, with what we're doing with the draft, it's so important to our build that I'm naturally aggressive at the draft. And so that's certainly been, I guess, a hallmark of this period of our rebuild. We'll see as we move forward and shift into a different period and how the draft plays into that. But I don't know. I don't think anyone. Honestly, I don't think anyone thinks of me and thinks, oh, aggressive at the draft table or something like that. But maybe other than Eric. Eric probably thinks that because we gave him a bunch of picks for late first rounders. So I don't know. Probably not.
All right.
Anton.
Whoa, me and Mike Donaghy saying all right in sync there. That's weird. All right, but end of Kyle's time. I would love to share my thoughts about Mike Donaghy's comments as well, but here I am talking for an hour as I react to Kyle's comments in the first place. So maybe another video another time. But anyway, couple things I'll quickly highlight. I think this was before the last time I even paused the video, but nonetheless, I don't have anything to say about the Burakovsky trade. I don't really care. It's not a needle mover. Is what it is. It's a low risk trade. Maybe a conversation for another time, but I doubt it really. It is what it is. It's not a big deal. I do want to say as well, I appreciate Comment's opinion on the decentralized format. I don't know how many of you all watched the draft. I thought it was a horrendous experience as a viewer. I thought it was the worst draft that I've ever watched, probably of any sport, in all honesty. I thought it was extremely awkward, so I hope they never do it again. That's my honest opinion, but on a human level, glad that Kyle got to go home and see his family. I'm laughing, but I mean that genuinely. That must be a devastatingly a hard part of the draft in a normal draft season. So fair enough there. But and Kyle kind of closes with reiterating some of his identity for being aggressive at the draft, albeit he's saying that he doesn't think that people see him in that light. You know, they don't identify him as aggressive. I disagree with him. It's, you know, I'm sitting here at home. I'm not even there. It's not my job. I think it's pretty obvious that he's aggressive at the draft, so I think that he's probably a little bit wrong there. But you never know. As he calls out, Eric Tulsky definitely thinks that he's aggressive at the draft and likes to trade picks. And frankly, that's not a guy that you want knowing your weaknesses or your MO, I guess, for that matter. But anyway, I think it's worked out for the Blackhawks so far. So anyway, overall, my thoughts on the Blackhawks draft. I think they get a B+ first round, and like I said, I kind of wrote these notes the night of the first round, so there's been, you know, obviously a whole second day worth of the draft that's happened since. Really quickly, picks to highlight from my perspective. Nathan Beam, I like that. That's solid value. I don't have a strong opinion personally of, you know, the likelihood of Nathan Beam being an NHL player one day, but I have no problem with the pick. I think, you know, a guy that's kind of under the radar, plays the game well. We'll see what happens. Outside of that, Julius Sumpf, I like that pick too. I think Julius Sumpf is kind of a do-it-all guy that you can rely on, complimentary sort of player, as people say about Anton Frondel as well. Like having those guys. You know, you could see him in a bottom 6 role in the future, potentially. Well, I forget the kid's name. I think it's Parker Holm. People have a lot of opinions about the I forget if it's actually his name, but people have a lot of opinions about that pick. It's not a good one. It's not high value. I don't think that the Blackhawks are under any false impression that it is a good value pick. So at the end of the day, I don't really care that they made that pick. Good, bad, or otherwise, I don't really care. I think they were trying to pick up a goon, a guy who's hard to play against, as I believe it's Mike Donaghy that ended up saying. Maybe that works out. Who knows? Probably not, but who knows? And then the only other pick that I can recall at this time, and I'm, you know, sorry to any potential picks that I might be forgetting, but the goalie whose name I am forgetting off the top of my head, I know nothing about him personally. I've heard that he's just kind of a lotto pick. Saw his MHL stats; they seem pretty good. Again, we'll see what it is. Those late round picks, it's always kind of the same story. So we'll see. Time will tell. Probably not too much stock to put into them. So again, I'm going to focus on what I think about for the first round here. And I think that's a B+ after all is said and done. I think my initial opinion was more of just a B. You know, I when the Blackhawks traded back into the first round, I didn't think that they were going to pick Mason West. The more time that gets put in between now and when they made the pick, the more I like it, especially knowing that the Kings were planning on taking him in the first round. I think that changes a lot. In all honesty, give this a year, this draft might end up being closer to an A for me. Because again, me personally, I just have a hunch that Mason West is going to put it all together and be kind of a game breaker potentially. We'll see. But anyway, just to go back, kind of recap the first round here. I believe in Anton Frondel. I would have loved to get Michael Misa. I haven't actually taken the time to say that in this draft or in this video, but on Twitter, I was really vocal leading up to the draft. Misa's been my guy all year. I've publicly stated that my delusion, my ultimate dream for this draft was getting Michael Misa and somehow Porter Martone both in the first round of this draft, and then just being set for life, essentially, in my opinion. So obviously none of that happened. We got Michael Misa off the board at 2 by the Sharks, and then the Blackhawks land Anton Frondel, and I'm really happy with that. Obviously, you know, Misa's off the table. And, you know, days leading up, it seemed like that might have been a possibility for the Blackhawks. I think now it's fair to say that that was never really a question, or never really on the table. But regardless, Frondell has a game that I think should translate really well to the NHL, and all reports seem to allude to him being a very coachable player, like I had kind of called out before, who's motivated to get better. And those two intangibles, people love talking about intangibles in hockey. And honestly, Anton Frondell is chock full of intangibles that you really want to see. You can add leadership into what I just said, but being coachable and motivated to get better, I think are two intangibles that can move mountains, like sincerely. I don't know if anyone who is watching this video has kind of heard the um, testimonials, I don't know, the Marcus Kruger and his other teammates, both in his age group and his teammates at Djurgården. People clamor about Anton Frondell's want to get better. Same way they clamored about it for Connor Bedard. That's a different topic for another time potentially. But anyway, those are huge. You know, they can really make the difference for a player. They can make a difference for a team, for that matter. So again, I'm a believer. I'm excited to see what Anton Frondell brings to the Hawks. I'm really excited to see if he ends up joining the Blackhawks for this upcoming season, and just to kind of see how that all plays out. In all honesty, my opinion would be that he probably is better served with another season elsewhere. I think most prospects are better served with a kind of a buffer year, if you will, before coming to the NHL from whatever league they're coming from, with the exception of the NCAA. But anyway, I digress. Rondell, thumbs up, love it. Happy to see it. Nestersill and West picks to me don't they don't sit perfectly. Kind of, you know, I said this is a B plus. There's a reason it's not an A. And you know, I like Nestersill. I like West. I wanted both of those guys. I wanted the Blackhawks to take both of those guys, but I didn't want them to be taken as early as they were in my ideal world. You know, I had some other guys that I personally really liked, and I know I'm not alone in this, in the Blackhawks fandom, but also just in the, you know, kind of the, I guess, the prospecting community at large. You know, guys like Malcolm Spence were on the board. Lyndon Lakovich was on the board when Nestersill was picked. I, based on everything that I've seen, those guys project as better players, and still play like a heavy game, which clearly the Blackhawks were looking for here. And they're just a little smaller than Václav and Mason West are. So, you know, those guys aren't small. Just not as big as these two guys. And, you know, it just, I guess it kind of leaves a little bit of a bad taste in my mouth of where the Blackhawks prioritizing, you know, to go against what Kyle Davidson said during this time, were they prioritizing just size over these two other guys? You know what I mean? Like, is that what tipped the scale in favor of Nestersill and Mason West? The fact that they were bigger than Lyndon Lakovich, Malcolm Spence. And if that's the thought process, I don't love that, honestly. I think that, you know, you can get the best of both worlds, big guys who are guys who play a big game, without them just having to be the biggest guy available, frankly. So again, I don't love them. I certainly don't hate them, and I do like them for that matter. I like the picks. But there's just, you know, like I said, a little bit of a bad taste left in my mouth that I just can't help but wonder if they were prioritized solely because they are monsters. But anyway, I think that about sums up my my thoughts. You know, at the end of the day, only time's going to tell what the best choices were here. And to go back to what I was saying at the start of the video here, these guys are going to the NCAA. Blackhawks have a track record at this point of NCAA products coming out and exceeding expectations. So we'll see. That's really what it boils down to. Only time will tell with all of these guys. Would have loved to have the Hawks have a chance at taking a second round pick, a couple of them even, especially knowing now that that Malcolm Spence went pretty late into the second round. So that one's going to be a what if for a little while, but again, who knows? Could go either way. All that to say, if you're still here 1 hour and 4 minutes into a YouTube video from a guy who's never even posted a YouTube video, Well, that's not true, but never posted a hockey YouTube video before, at least. Would love to know your thoughts. What stood out to you about the Blackhawks draft? How are you feeling heading into next season? So, yeah, leave me a comment again if you're here. Like the video if you're here. That would be nuts, honestly, if you're, again, still here an hour into me just kind of rambling. But yeah, anyway, appreciate you. Again, let me know your thoughts and see you soon at some point.